And we are live. Adam, thank you so much for joining me in our now weekly updates of what is going on in the courts. And we were just talking before everyone started jumping on. You know, there is never a dull moment these days. So should we kick off with Sean Combs and what's going on there? I mean, my layman's read of this is that they're bringing in now the people who worked for Sean Combs, because their testimony basically corroborates that of Cassie Ventura and you know, the people who sued Sean Combs for money. And so and the money is the weak spot, right? I mean, that's what the defense is trying to argue, is that this is all about money. You know, no one was suing when money wasn't on the table. So the testimony of the assistants is important because that's not about the money. That's just telling their story of what it was like to work for Sean Combs. And that's important because we've talked about this is a racketeering case, not a case about sexual abuse, at least when it comes to the criminal charges. So over to you.
Absolutely. Now, you're right. There has been a lot of testimony lately from folks who were in Sean Combs's entourage. I believe I wasn't there this afternoon, but it seems like the latest witness was a friend of Cassie Ventura, one of a number of friends who have testified, and former friends and acquaintances. And so you're absolutely right. They're trying to undercut the defense of, oh, this is just a financially motivated scheme to get a big settlement. Well, if you have 3 or 4 or more people corroborating the same testimony, it's harder to make that argument, which no doubt the defense attorneys will try to do in closing arguments. There was a very interesting report. I wasn't in court for this moment, but there was apparently a report of an HR official for Sean Combs's enterprise, that there was testimony that the HR person pointed to an image of Diddy and said that this is Diddy's kingdom. And
I saw that.
it's such a striking report because imagine, under the best of circumstances, you have HR to vindicate your rights. If there's a problem in the workplace, you go to HR, and it obviously doesn't always work out that way. But there's something absolutely extreme when the HR officer tells you this is that boss's kingdom. And that boss is the one who is accused of kidnapping you, sexually assaulting you. It just shows that this is an employee, an entourage that is there to protect the boss. And that's the heart of this case. This is a racketeering case. And it's saying that, when it's the heart of Diddy's defense here, he may be a bad guy, may be very troubled, there might be a lot of problems, but it's not racketeering. It's not La Cosa Nostra. But once you actually look at what's being alleged here, we're talking about bribery, we're talking about blackmail, we're talking about the threatened release of sex tapes. Then you have to ask, well, what is? Is it only organized crime as portrayed in Goodfellas or The Sopranos? Racketeering, criminal racketeering, as alleged in state court against Donald Trump after the 2020 election, talks about organized criminal wrongdoing. And that's what the jury is considering. Is the entire apparatus, from everything from HR to the personal assistants who are being ordered to go into a car to go to the romantic rival of the boss's girlfriend, does that add up to a conspiracy that we can think of as analogous to organized crime? That's what's at issue here. And that's why we're hearing from the entourage. That's why we're hearing from the friends. Yes, it's about corroboration. Corroboration is hugely important, but it's also about the enterprise. That's what's being alleged. Now, he's the sole defendant, but it doesn't mean that the conspiracy can't happen with an entire enterprise involved. That's what the jury's being asked to consider. I mentioned Trump. I want to talk about just kind of one more point related to that, because I'm sure you noticed the news that Trump has not ruled out a pardon
Yes.
for P. Diddy here if he is convicted. He said he'll look at the facts of the case. It's a rare commitment to due process from an administration that has not really. So why that commitment here? And it's very interesting because I remember one of the pieces of testimony I did catch was Mia's. She's one of the big accusers. And something that was happening during her cross examination reminded me of another case in the same courtroom, E. Jean Carroll v. Donald Trump. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. There was, during her testimony, she had accused P. Diddy of sexual assault. She gave really emotional testimony on her first day, and it went well into day two. And when cross-examination began, uh, Sean Combs's lawyer tried to undercut what she was saying by pointing to her social media account. And she had lots of Instagram posts that were praising the boss. And it took me back to the E. Jean Carroll trial, because during that trial, you had Trump's lawyers trying to discredit E. Jean Carroll by pointing out that she talked about how much she was a fan of The Apprentice. And that's true. And E. Jean Carroll's quite open about this. She says it was good television. She happens to be a big fan of that show. The jury in that case did not think the fact that she praised Trump on social media discredited her claims, and they awarded her a multi-million-dollar settlement. Not settlement, multi-million-dollar verdict. So we'll see. This is a common tactic that we're seeing in high-profile cases involving allegations of sexual misconduct, that you turn to social media. And in the Trump case, in it was a civil case, obviously, it's E. Jean Carroll v. Trump, that the jury didn't buy that defense. They didn't think that discredited the main witness's testimony. We're seeing the same thing happening in the Combs case. We'll see if that happens in a different set of circumstances. But, as I mentioned earlier, Trump was also accused of criminal racketeering in Georgia with the 2020 election. This is a racketeering trial. He's apparently keeping an open mind with a pardon, so maybe this case will take on a deeper political resonance than it has so far.
Well,
down the road.
I was so curious about this, Adam, that I did some very basic research this morning. So Trump and Diddy are friends, which I had not realized. And from way back when, from when Trump was, Donald Trump, New York real estate magnate, and there was a sort of the rap community embraced him because they felt he wasn't a corporate elite. So there was that bond. So I gotta say, the fact that Trump would say now that he's going to look at everything before this trial is even concluded, I didn't take that as, oh great, this will be due process. I took that as, oh God, dangerous for the president to say even that at this stage.
Absolutely. Now, my due process remark was somewhat tongue in cheek, because we all know we all know Trump's opinions on due process. I mean, his Secretary of Homeland Security thinks habeas corpus is the license for the executive to whisk people out of the country without due process. So I was being a little ironic with that. However, I will say it also reminded me of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, and you remember Trump's words during that. I wish her well. That case is still in active appeals. We'll see. It is another remarkable thing that it seems that one of the few times this supposed commitment to due process is activated here is during a high-profile sex trafficking case of people with whom he was associated. So we will see what comes of that. But it was remarkable in my mind because when he said that, it was right during the day that that Mia was testifying and Combs's lawyers tried to discredit her through social media, the same tactic that was used on E. Jean Carroll unsuccessfully in the civil lawsuit.
Well, I got to say, I mean, and now we're in the realm of less legal analysis and more sort of, character analysis. But, I do know President Trump. I used to know him actually pretty well. And the one thing, and you don't even need to know him well to know that he doesn't like, quote unquote, losers. And I think that the one thing that has really come out in this trial of Sean Combs is what an appalling person he is. I mean, there's no one has said anything that I've read that's been redeeming about him. He seems to have been a bully, a harasser, a bully, physically violent. I mean, the best thing that can be said about him are his quirks. So apparently he doesn't like British tomato ketchup and he had to have Heinz flown over and he wants to have applesauce on his cheeseburgers. That's the best thing that one has read about him. And I think when it comes to Ghislaine Maxwell, I will be curious because, again, in the court of public opinion, Trump does care about that. In the court of public opinion, including in the MAGA base public opinion, there's not much that redeems her. So, we shall see. But since we are now discussing the culture in a way and the mood, I do want to ask you about the Harvey Weinstein retrial because I know Harvey, and I've never really talked about the fact that after he was charged in New York and LA, he phoned me up in 2019 because I had worked for him once upon a time. And over the years, he used to phone me up and actually talk to me about ideas for books that I might write and he might want to publish. I will say I never had any kind of weird interaction with him. I got the good Harvey. I got the man who was incredibly cultured, incredibly well read, full of ideas. That's the one I got. And he had read my book on Jared Kushner, and he had thought that I would not be, to use his words, afraid to take on the establishment, which is why he was reaching out to me. And I ended up going, I was curious. I'm a journalist, going to meet with him in an office he had above Cipriani on 42nd Street. And it was like walking into a time capsule. The windows, it was a small office, and he filled it with his very large presence. He had a publicist named Judah who was busy, doing Harvey's bidding. And the windows were had newspaper sellotaped to them, so no cameras could look in. And the walls were covered with black and white photographs of Harvey with people like the Clintons, but also with all the movie stars that he'd created, including the movie stars who had then come out, and accused him of harassment at best and sexual abuse at worst. So it was a kind of fascinating experience. And I sat there for 3 hours with him as he, walked me through, his defense in his mind, which was that, yes, he'd behaved immorally, but he wasn't, yes, he'd gone out and slept with actresses, but, it was, to his mind, he was behaving badly, but they were using him too. And that he was the naive idiot who hadn't seen it. And he was the most upset of everyone was he was most upset by Gwyneth Paltrow, because I think he really felt that he had really, really made her career. And he kept pointing out to me that since they had sort of parted ways professionally, in his view, her career had tanked. And he felt that he'd also done her a huge favor because he had optioned the book, The Secret History, and her brother, Jake Paltrow, had then written a script. He'd paid Jake a couple of $1 million for this, according to him, and it was terrible. And that he'd done this as a huge favor to Gwyneth Paltrow. So he viewed her, and she, by the way, is obviously not even part of the lawsuits against him. I mean, it was just part of the reputational damage, right? He viewed that as I think, the most personal betrayal. But here we are. Everyone's wrapped up, right? The jury is now convened and considering what they've seen. And right at this moment, it's sort of actually it is worth remembering. I read this in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, that until we get a verdict in New York, despite the fact that all these women came out, many, many, many came out to talk about the experiences they'd had with Harvey Weinstein, as of now, it's only the encounter with one woman in LA that there are 3 charges there that he's convicted of, but it is one woman, which is very interesting, because unlike the Diddy case, this is a case about sex, right? And I guess it's important because this was the first sort of big Me Too case. And, what does it mean that it's now being retried? And what does it mean that the media hasn't really even bothered to report it?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely true that there hasn't been a lot of coverage on it. There's been some. There was a great article in the Times talking about what you just put your finger on, the changed climate, and what that means for the trial. And one of the things that they noted, they quoted some experts saying, "Okay, well, it's good for him. The firestorm has calmed down a bit." But they also noted it's not only a referendum on Me Too that it's less significant right now. You mentioned his conviction in LA. He has a 16-year sentence in that. So that affects the stakes of this. This is a retrial,
Yeah.
so we've heard a lot of the allegations, and part of the reasons that we're having a retrial is that other testimony went in. Some of the accusers who testified before, in the view of the appellate courts, should not have been permitted to go to the key allegations against him. So part of it is
Because they were character witnesses, really, right?
absolutely.
They weren't claiming, they weren't actual victims. They came in, and that was the issue, right?
Correct. So to some extent, retrials, I sat through part of the retrial of Sarah Palin versus the New York Times, and it's almost like a rerun of the episode. You've seen the movie before, you've seen the TV show before, so it gets less attention. We'll see what happens once there's a verdict. Of course, an acquittal would be a lightning rod to the conversation. And if it's a conviction, perhaps it will underline and everything that had happened before. So, that part of it, sure, it shows the changed climate, and I think everyone acknowledges that. But it's also competing with the fact that just across the street there is trial number 1 of Sean Combs, and all across the country there are cases against Donald Trump and the Trump administration about issues that go to the core of American democracy. So I think the trial is competing against a much larger news cycle, and that might redound to Harvey Weinstein's benefit. I'm sure that the defense is happy that it's not getting as much scrutiny and as much public attention as the first trial has. But yes, it's remarkable that this is happening right across the street from the Sean Combs trial, and it's getting a few reporters there a day at most.
Well, actually, so Adam, let's just think about that for a second, because I mean, you were very right when you first phoned me up and said, let's talk about the Sean Combs trial, because it is so interesting that the government is bringing the RICO charge.
Right.
And that the sex is almost, yeah, okay, he was sexually violent. Okay. I mean, should the government have brought a RICO case against Harvey Weinstein? I mean, or is this just this is a sort of new development for the U.S. attorney? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, these are two different jurisdictions. The reason I said across the street, the Sean Combs trial is happening in federal court. These are federal racketeering charges that involve interstate commerce. The federal government did not take up these charges. These are charges that were taking place in, on separate tracks in Los Angeles and Manhattan. So I think that's part of the reason you see a different treatment here. I don't know whether there was any consideration at the Department of Justice to do it differently here with Harvey Weinstein, but it just so happened that the first one to go forward in New York was the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and that's why it's there, and that's why I think we're seeing the different charges.
Yeah. Really interesting. Okay, so bring us up to speed on what you call the Trump docket. I mean, just before we came on, we were discussing the breaking news about Columbia, right? The Department of Education threatening it with losing its accreditation, which would basically shut it down, right? Unless it brings up, brings up all the sort of diversity stuff that the government doesn't like, gets rid of all that. Where does that fit in? Where are we with Harvard? Has there been any movement since last week on that?
Well, right now, Harvard is seeking summary judgment, and there's very little doubt that it will get summary judgment on the funding issue. It's very interesting. I was speaking a little bit earlier in the week with Asha Rangappa, who's, in addition to her former career as an FBI counterintelligence agent, is now an associate dean at Yale, so has some perspective on that. And she talked about how investigations for real violations of civil rights goes, because there was one at Yale University. It took 15 months, and it was about the university potentially keep turning a blind eye to gender discrimination. And there's a process, and the punishments are tailored to the alleged offenses. And this is how it goes when a government investigation is legitimate. It's not a kind of court of the Red Queen where the government says, we think you're anti-Semitic, and therefore your accreditation is under review, and we'll let you know when the verdict is. There's a process for it. So even if, let's say, one is of the view, someone's watching this live stream and is concerned about what they believe is going on at one of these universities. Okay, let's have a legitimate investigation, see what's actually happening, sort out the facts, and get process going. So you were actually the first person to alert me. It's so breaking, the news about the accreditation, that I had no idea until we got on to prepare for the live stream. And but it seems like a new thing every day, because it seems to be the whim of one person that's driving all of this. This is why Harvard's winning in the courts right now, why they are likely to continue winning in the future. It reminds me of another court proceeding that I've been covering in the Southern District of New York involving a Columbia University student, Yunseo Chung. She's one of the pro-Palestinian protesters. And unlike all of the other cases, she's not in custody right now because DHS can't find her. So the federal judge offered a solution. She said, why don't you, the government attorney, just hand over a notice to appear to her attorneys sitting at this plaintiff's table, and then she'll be in custody. You can initiate deportation proceedings. And if you think that she's deportable, she'll have her defenses, but we'll go forward. Tomorrow, there'll be a hearing where we find out what the government's answer to that question is, because the government's answer wasn't an immediate yes. The judge was shocked by that. She said, "You've got to be kidding." And so that's, what everyone's views of universities, that there's a fundamental due process concern here, and that before the government takes dramatic action to try to dismantle the Department of Education, that's a separate case that's been going on, or tries to burden or freeze the funds of or destroy the accreditation of a major college, a major university with international repercussions, that's not how any of this is supposed to work. So that's one of the latest things. And another piece of breaking news that I think I mentioned on an immigration level is the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Yes. So the judge in that case just today granted the immigration attorneys the permission to seek sanctions against the government for discovery violations, and granted the press, a number of major news outlets, abilities to unseal the records over discovery, showing just how recalcitrant the administration has been. During the discovery process, you're supposed to discover things, and the government has clammed up so often that the judge thinks, apparently, that it may be sanctionable. Just yesterday, in another education-related ruling, a judge preserved the ability to potentially seek and enforce some sort of enforcement, maybe even contempt down the road, if the government doesn't unfreeze education-related funding for COVID relief. So these are a number of cases where, again, we're seeing the judiciary saying, look, there's a process for all of this and you need to follow it. And there are real consequences being put on the line.
But are there, Adam? So, because, as I know, lawyers do get sanctioned, but it's like having a slap on the wrist in that profession, and then they go back to work. So what does it mean if, what would it even look like if the judge issued sanctions in the Abrego Garcia case?
We'll figure out with the motion what sanctions they're requesting. I'll give you an example of what the consequences could be. Just yesterday, Ross Baraka, the mayor of Newark, sued Alina Habba in her personal capacity, meaning she made certain statements to the press, not as a U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey, but just going off the cuff. This is the allegations of the complaint, that she's doing it in her personal capacity. If a court accepts that she violated his rights in a personal capacity, Alina Habba personally is on the hook for that. She can't be represented by the government of the United States if a judge accepts that. And we know in the past, representing Trump, she faced a nearly $1 million sanction for filing a frivolous lawsuit, a racketeering lawsuit against Hillary Clinton and a number of other people who Trump claimed was in a giant racketeering conspiracy to make him look bad with the Russia investigation. It was an absurd lawsuit, and she was personally sanctioned. So we'll see. I say that there are potentially serious consequences on the line, not to be naive about, the shoe is going to drop and everything is going to change. But when when that gauntlet is thrown, uh, there could be serious professional consequences. I noticed that the judge in the Ross Baraka case brought up her professional ethics. I believe I need to check what.
Well, we should just remind everyone what happened because it's fairly extraordinary,
Right. Well,
right?
Ross Baraka, the mayor of Newark, was charged with trespass under a federal law that allowed them to pursue misdemeanor state violations because he appeared at a private ICE facility that he was suing to perform oversight. They accused him of trespass, and the case almost immediately collapsed. But before the case immediately collapsed, the district attorney of the state of New Jersey, who is Trump's former attorney, Alina Habba, pronounced what appeared to be pronouncing his guilt. You're not supposed to do that. I've been covering the federal courts for a long time, and you sit through a number of press conferences where the U.S. attorney says, as alleged in our indictment, so and so. And it's a clause that, it's like how every journalist knows to attribute all allegations because you want to preserve the presumption of innocence. It's why journalists speak carefully. It's why federal prosecutors don't shoot from the hip. And when federal prosecutors do shoot from the hip, there could be professional consequences. There could be ways to seek professional discipline, as has happened with Ed Martin, who's still in the Department of Justice while facing a potential ethics investigation. It's not to say that there's going to be this silver bullet that changes everything and the consequences are right around the corner. No, but there are boundaries, professional boundaries from which you can. They're methods of accountability, and that's what this is all about. That when the government violates your rights, when you're a citizen of a democracy or just a resident of a great democracy, that there are tools at your disposal to seek accountability from the people who would try to violate one's rights.
Well, on that note, I also urge, my followers know that I interviewed Michael Wolff here a few weeks ago, and it's worth reading his most recent book for what he tells us about Alina Habba and her unusual rise. Before she was Trump's personal attorney, she was primarily a member of the Trump golf club in Bedford. That's how she came across his radar, not because of her particular legal skills. And I will also add that next week, we're still figuring out a date. Larry Summers is going to come on and give us some insight into the battles between Harvard, which he obviously, where he works, and the government. Adam, I think so. If there's a verdict in the Weinstein case sooner rather than later, shall we try and come back and maybe talk about it?
Sounds great.
If it's before next Wednesday.
Sounds good.
But is there anything else we need? I feel like we could talk here for hours, but is there anything else in the courts that we should discuss here and now?
Well, I should mention that I think mentioned Trump's criminal trial last year. It is going back to the courts next week because Trump has a criminal appeal in federal court in the Second Circuit trying to transfer the case to federal court because he's still battling on the cusp of his birthday / Flag Day / the No King's Day protests. He is battling those 34 felony convictions with the U.S. government naturally by his side because it's the Department of Justice. So that will be a major event next week. I'll be covering it in the courts. You mentioned Alina Habba. I should mention one other anecdote on the matter of consequences. We were talking about the E. Jean Carroll trial earlier. There was a moment during that trial where very tough federal judge, Judge Kaplan, said to her that if she continued, I forget exactly what she was doing, but if she continued interrupting him or something of that nature, that she was very close to spending a night in the clink, meaning sending her to jail. So things become more serious in the court. Things have a way of finding consequences. We don't always see what they are. Sometimes there are 34 felony convictions, and sometimes those 34 felony convictions are appealed. It's complicated, but there are avenues for redress in a democracy, and that's one of the joys of covering the legal beat.
Well, on that note, we will be speaking very shortly, but thank you, Adam, very, very much for, as usual, giving us fascinating insight and analysis. See you very soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.